Hello, everyone. Is this thing working? Oh, perfect. I'm looking for two of my panelists. Inga, I saw her. Oh, you can come down, Inga. Hi, Pindi. And William. William is outside. Yeah. Oh, there he is by the door. You can sit anywhere. Feel free. Yeah.
Can you please stay here when you speak for people online? And yeah, and the markets.
Okay, thanks. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tafadzwa, and I'll be convening and facilitating the final session of the day before we all go and enjoy the cocktail. So we'll try to keep it short and sweet. So we'll try to have the presentations a bit shorter. So to my panel, I think we are going to have one main presentation from our keynote speaker. And after that, we'll have some responses from our panelists in the round table. And the responses will be, I'll present some questions, but I'll expect you to respond to the topic based on your perspective and your specialization. So the focus of this afternoon session is on the water, energy, food nexus. So I think there have been presentations during the day that touched on aspects of the water, energy, food nexus. So from the minister's presentation in the morning, she kept flagging the issue that agriculture is using a lot of water, but they need more. But water is saying you already have a lot, there's no more. But they need to increase the area under irrigation, but they need more water, but someone is saying no more. Mary Jean came in afterwards and highlighted two key things, that agriculture is water intensive and it is energy intensive. So there are significant trade-offs between water and energy for food. And where we are in Southern Africa and in Africa, and as you know, the preamble to this document rightfully says, we are facing an uncertain future in terms of climate change, where we definitely know that in most of the places, we are not going to have as much water as we currently do. We expect declining or decreasing amounts of precipitation. At the same time, we expect increasing levels of evapotranspiration and also increasing levels of runoff. So where we do get rainfall to be in heavy downpours, we will lose most of it to runoff, because in a lot of areas we do not have sufficient storage to then capture and store that water and use it during the dry periods. Where we've got water, we often lack the infrastructure and resources to pump and distribute the water so that it can be of use. And where we've got the infrastructure and resources, there is a physical scarcity of water. But be that as it may, we've got a growing population that is rapidly urbanizing, and we expect that by 2050, a majority of our people will be residing in urban areas. And we need to think about how do we feed those people with a dwindling resource base? How do we innovate along the lines of water, energy, and food? How do we bring circularity into this space so that we can reuse and repurpose these resources? So we've got an interesting lineup of speakers and panelists this afternoon with us, who in their own experiences are dealing with these issues from very different perspectives and bring very different and diverse skill sets. So we hope that we'll be able to catalyze some debate and discussion that will hopefully carry forward beyond today, and hopefully that we can identify some key priorities in terms of intervention and areas for policy development. So without taking any further time, I'm going to invite our keynote speaker, Andre. Andre is with ICRISAT in Ethiopia. Formerly, I think a lot of people in the region would remember him from, he spent 18 years? 18 years in Zimbabwe at ICRISAT in Matopos, and he's very well loved, very well known, and has done a lot of research, especially in smallholder farming systems. So if there's someone who is familiar with the complexity of these systems, Andre would be that person. Thank you very much, Andre. I'll give you 15 minutes for your keynote.
Tatenda Kakulu. So, as I've been introduced, I work with ICRISAT. ICRISAT is that wonderful organization that think they know everything, that strive to know most things. Just a little blurb about us. We won the Africa Food Prize in 2021, and this year, just to counter some of the earlier sentiments, 2023 is International Year of the Millets. So please, when you have an opportunity, support us in that space. Next slide, please. I'm going to talk about circular food systems, complexities, how do we transform agricultural systems based on what you've learned a lot about this morning from my colleagues Macarius, Jamie, and others. So this is building on 10 years of research. And Macarius has already displayed this image, but it essentially illustrates the complexities of agriculture. And too often, us in the research and development world, we want to push the technologies, the tools, the fertilizer rates, the seed rates, how deep do you plant, when you plant. But the picture on the far right is what people are really all about, is what are their aspirations, what are their needs and wants, and where do they want to go, and how we as scientists can contribute to achieving those aspirations. And yes, the technologies are part of it. Yes, changing behavior on farming systems is part of that. But essentially, it must be driven by something. And that something is often markets. Markets is one of the great incentives for changes in behavior, but risk and labor are two other very important components that drive adoption of technologies. Next slide, please. So why circular food systems? We know that we are pushing the envelope, we are pushing the planetary boundaries. We've just heard people saying things about agriculture is one of the most thirsty activities on the face of the earth, as if we are not eating the products of that agriculture. So we need to think a little bit about how we produce food, how do we use our natural resources, how do we stimulate economic growth, and there's a lot being said about social inclusivity and equity, and a lot has been talked about gender in the past. So can we transition to sustainable, climate-smart, circular food systems? That's the big question I'm asking. Next slide, please. So why do we want to experiment with circular food systems, specifically around irrigation systems? And the thought occurred to me after working with irrigation systems for many years, because there's already a lot of human capacity. There's already, the farmers are often very well organized already. They have very strong networks. They have information systems. They are often engaging in collective activities. So there's already a lot going on. And yes, they are already integrated with the rest of the dryland agriculture. Most irrigation farmers in Africa also have access to dryland. But and there's the big but, is that most of the raw products that farmers produce goes to Harare or Addis Ababa or Dar es Salaam, and there's very little economic stimulation around the irrigation schemes. And that's what's bothered me for a long time, ever since I really started getting involved with irrigation. So it results, Martin Moyo and I once calculated that the average bread mile in Zimbabwe is 800 kilometers. Because the wheat is produced in Silalachane, it gets transported to somewhere in Harare, it gets milled in Bulawayo, it gets baked in Bulawayo, and then the bread is transported back to Gwanda. It shouldn't be that way. So, next slide please. So how can we use circular systems to transition? I want to take you back. I'm not an economist, I'm not an historian, but a lot of what we do in the modern world is based on the economies of scale. Economies of scale was born in the Industrial Revolution, where you had to develop things big enough to be driven by steam, and you had to bake 500 breads or mill 200 tons of stuff before you could get economically viable. I invite you to spend an hour or two on Alibaba.com and to realize that it's changed completely. You can now buy mills that can mill 100 kilograms of wheat in a day and bake 5 breads in a day, or whatever you want to do. You need the mechanization, you can buy it on Alibaba.com. And so what I'm trying to put forward to you today is that I think we need in Africa a transition from the economies of scale to the economies of scope. Because infrastructure and the mechanization, the tools and the aspirations of people allow us to do that. One of the reasons that I'm thinking a lot about this is because if you talk to the youth, and there's a lot of talk about the youth in agriculture, they have to go to Harare, rent a flat, take the bus home every now and again. So their overheads to get a job in the urban areas are very high. But perhaps, just perhaps, if we give them access to small and medium enterprises around the irrigation schemes, they would be happy with $300 or $400. So that's the kind of thinking behind it. So it's not just technologies, it's also about the aspirations of farmers. And this is the kind of thinking that I'm engaging in, is to say, yes, we can have wheat, we can mill wheat or maize. There's a whole bunch of byproducts from those commodities. We can get people to eventually bake the bread or package the maize. But there's a lot of byproducts that often in the old system would go to Harare. And instead of being an input to a new system at the local area, it becomes either a pollutant or a waste product. But if we keep the processing close to the irrigation scheme, they could be the inputs for another enterprise like chickens or dairy or something else. And if nothing else, we can throw it back into the soil. So integrating these products and production systems and using the waste and byproducts for the one from the other one, we can begin to engineer more complex, integrated, small and medium enterprises driven by the youth. And that's the basic hypothesis. Next one, please. So how do we start? And this is just, I'm quite embarrassed showing this stuff because this is how my brain works. We can start at farm level, integrate cereals, legumes, and livestock, which is what I've been doing in Zimbabwe for a long time, creating tighter loops of nutrients and water. Next one. Selling those products into the local village market, integrating households, buying and selling from one another. Next slide, please. Continuing that nested cycle of integrated systems to local markets, say in Filabuzi and eventually in Gwanda. Next one. And so forth until we get to the city market. So the idea is to try and develop around irrigation systems this nested, integrated, cyclic systems. Yes, they will never be complete. We will always have to import stuff and we will often have to export stuff. But at least we can make a start in circulating nutrients, energy, water, knowledge, etc. through these systems. Next slide, please. So how do we do this? A lot of the thinking of this comes from our work on the innovation platforms within the TISA project, where you start with a scattered bunch of people, each doing their own thing, and they may have a little connection here and there. The second diagram, we set up an innovation platform at a central place. We bring people together, we stimulate the development of networks until we have a very, very strong network. And I was sitting here just now looking at this. This is kind of what CAREP is doing, or the Africa Union is doing. We're connecting the dots, and we're making people understand a common idea, a common principle. And then, next slide, please. Then what we try to do is to work at this higher level, where we share information, ideas, develop common understanding, common aspirations, and we try to filter that through to what people are doing on the ground. So if you look at the diagram on the right, instead of having a linear system for producing food from an irrigation system ending up in the urban areas, let's work with these people at the higher level to begin to cooperate, develop the networks, engage in the activities on the ground that would stimulate circular systems. Next slide, please. So circularity of what? We had a discussion now around water. So yes, water is one of the critical things, and I love water because it's such a multifunctional thing. We drink it, we play with it, we irrigate with it, we do so many things. And if we can use water as one of those critical variables that we want to cycle or create tighter cycles through the system, it would be really great. Nutrients, of course, is the other one. Nitrogen is expensive. With what's happening in the Ukraine, in Ethiopia, the price of fertilizers increased fivefold in the last 8 months. So the price of fertilizer is going to increase. The transportation of it is going to increase. So we need systems in which we can create tighter cycles of nutrients. Biomass carbon, of course, is critically important. Energy, the same. But also finances. Imagine a group of young ladies baking bread from wheat that they bought from another small micro enterprise, selling it to local people. All the byproducts go into a chicken system, and people begin to buy, and you create these local economies around irrigation schemes, which we do not see. And that's kind of where we want to go back. So the circularity of dollars, Zim dollars in particular, is critical. But also the flow of intangible resources, information, the incentives of people to work together, to design their own circular economies, and building small and medium enterprises based on circularity. Next slide. I think we're almost done. Yes, we're done. So that's the idea, ladies and gentlemen, and our dear friend made the promise this morning of 3.6 million Australian dollars. We are starting, when you all go back on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, we'll be working very hard on refining the proposal to do it, to make it work, to experiment, and we would love to work with as many of you as possible. And therefore, much of this presentation is to solicit feedback from you and say, Van Rooyen, you're crazy, or this is good, or let's do it let's get a discussion going. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, Andre. I think that was a very short, sweet, and thought-provocative presentation. I think it touched on several issues that also reflect on the panel that we have. So I think they'll be able to give responses building from that. So I'll kickstart in no particular order, but following from the minister this morning. Actually, we're not doing very well today. Yeah, I think. Oh, you were not here in the morning, Inga. The minister sort of castigated us, the boys' club, for...
Counts for 5.
Yeah, Inga can dominate the room, so you are all outnumbered in that case. But yeah, I think it's what the minister said is it's valid, and it's also something that as we have these discussions this week, we also need to think about, diversity and inclusion within the broader community of practice itself. How do we bring in more people? How do we bring in young people? And how do we bring in especially young girls into this space so that they are also mentored and supported to be sitting next to Inga there? We need more Ingas, to dominate this space. So Inga, I'll kickstart with you on that note of saying you're a powerful woman. I think you've got a... Yeah.
Do you want us to stand here or should I?
Yeah, you can come and stand here. I've been told that speakers need to stand here so that our guests online can see you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Tafadzwa. Hi, everyone. Lovely to be here, and I clearly missed a very exciting morning session by the minister. I didn't prepare a presentation or anything like that, but Andre really inspired through to form. So of course there's lots of ideas to share. But I maybe just a little bit about me. I work for the International Water Management Institute. I head up the Southern Africa offices. And for those who don't know, IMI is part of CGIAR. And for those who don't know what's been happening in CGIAR, there's the cocktail tonight, so I'll tell you all about it if you're interested. But really, there's been quite a big push for CGIAR entities to start, really embracing this kind of systems transformation of the agri-food system. And something that IMI has been doing also with ICRISAT, my colleague Martin Moyo, Zonful, one of our agribusiness champions in Zimbabwe, so many others, has been to focus on the agribusiness ecosystem. So it's really sort of like redefining the relevance of our science. We are pushing, some might say uncomfortably so, others are embracing it, but it's sort of pushing science where we can provide that kind of evidence base to acceleration, agribusiness acceleration. So we believe that SMEs, agri-SMEs, as Andre also spoke about, is really the glue that links the farm to the market. And so how do we do that? I've got a little video that maybe shares an example of one of these projects, which might make it a little bit clearer. So if we can just show that video very quickly, and then I can just say one or two things after that.
Maize is the most important staple food. It's especially key in Eastern and Southern Africa, where it makes up 30% of daily food intake. While important to many Africans' diets, maize has low nutritional content, is vulnerable to climate change and pests and diseases like fall armyworm. In response to this, the CGIAR has kicked off a regional initiative called Ukama Ustawi, which strives to support a climate-resilient, water-secure, and socially inclusive transformation of the region's agricultural sector.
Ukama is a Shona word that refers to humanity's relatedness to each other, so partnerships, how we engage with each other and our biophysical world. Ustawi is a Kiswahili word referring to well-being, prosperity, development. Together, they resemble the essence of what we're trying to do with this initiative.
We're talking about scaling mechanisms, and this would create a sort of enabling environment for the farmers to actually have access to these great innovations, and so that we can actually use it in their fields.
Developed by the region, for the region, Ukama Ustawi demonstrates how, through partnerships, research for development can lead to systemic change and impact on the ground.
Our role as WellFish is in several areas, including the bottlenecks that women
youth and marginalized communities are facing in accessing finance, technologies, in accessing the knowledge that they need in order to be productive farmers.
We visit farmers across the country, we find out what their problems are, and then we bring in the experts from research, development, commercial sector partners to come and solve those problems. In Zambia, we're really excited because we'll be working with SMEs that have gone through an accelerator program. They've been selected and they've got some really good innovations happening on the ground. We'll be working with those SMEs to actually put them on the program. And then when this broadcasts out to millions of farmers, they can get in touch with us to find out more information on a really simple way.
Ukama Ustawi will strengthen agribusiness sustainability by helping unlock private investment and supporting policies that can help improve market access for these farmers.
The project is focused on the maize mix systems of East and Southern Africa, diversifying those systems, intensifying them at the same time, and developing innovation packages that we can deliver to farmers on their farm to help them accomplish to do that.
And what we want to do to support the transformation of food systems for more affordable, sufficient, but also healthy diets, and then produced within planetary boundaries. Maize is a very dominant crop, 35 million hectares in this region. Quite healthy, but not enough. So we need also other crops like legumes, like vegetables, to make it possible also to have an affordable but also healthy diet.
If you want to go fast, you go alone.
If you want to go far, go together. Just one of these projects that we are involved in that sort of tries to capture what I'm talking about. In fact, this is one, but there are several, and there seems to be quite an encouraging trend in this field of how we provide evidence, science-based evidence to inform accelerator programs. And while there's no sort of, silver bullet for scaling, I just wanted to maybe also emphasize three things that, Andre, you also touched on in your presentation. And the first one, I think, sort of echoing your notion of non-linear systems, is this, what we're finding is this importance of bundling innovations. So we can no longer only talk about, the irrigation system, but also everything around it. And some of the innovators that we are supporting under these programs, in fact, Richard here from the Virtual Irrigation Academy is one of those that's also part of our Water and Energy for Food hub, which has a very similar model. Really, it's around supporting these innovators to bundle innovations. So irrigation coupled with digital platforms, coupled with solar, as well as sort of microfinancing, for example. That's sort of one bundle. So we're bundling both innovations and also bundling partnerships. And we're finding that SMEs are really able to achieve scale much more than what they can do on their own. So that's just the one thing about bundling. The second thing, and it came out in the video, but that's the importance of communication channels. So it's, it's no longer just enough to be able to stop at the scaling intervention, but what we are now finding is also the need to partner with communication partners who disseminate innovation, disseminate information about how to scale. One of the partners is Shamba Shape Up. Some of you may know them. They operate in Kenya, but we've actually expanded that with Ikrisat, with Martin. Really exciting a Zambian version of that called Munda Makeover in Zambia, where we're scaling these kind of innovations using local experts as well as CGIAR experts on the show to profile these innovations. And then the last thing is just to say, and perhaps this is something we need to get a lot better at. I see Anton is in the room. He's also done a lot of work on this kind of finance side of things. So that still remains the gap, of course, inclusive finance, particularly for women and youth-owned businesses, and helping to get these SMEs and partnerships investment ready. So let me just leave it at that. It was a mouthful, Tafadzwa. Sorry. Andre inspired us. So that's it.
No, thank you very much, Inga. I think that was a very useful presentation. Shifting our focus a bit, today we've mostly talked about technologies, how to improve them, how to deploy them, but I think the conversation around the agribusinesses and supporting acceleration, and even the work that you are doing with the Munda shows, I think that's the sort of innovation that we need. You've talked about pushing the boundaries, and I'm a technical person, so I'm one of those people who would have obviously said, no, let's keep it inside. But I think it's important, because part of what we are addressing today is complexity. And complexity needs disruptive thinking and innovation for us to be able to actually start addressing it. So that sort of innovation, those sort of disruptive activities that you are bringing in are really useful to the transformation that we need. I'll move on to our next panelist. Now, talking about businesses and entrepreneurship, our next panelist is actually an entrepreneur. He is the CEO and founder of Zonfu Energy, which is a growing company in Zimbabwe. He's part of the Water Energy for Food Hub, and is also one of our implementing partners under Okama Ustawi in Zimbabwe, assisting us with delivering solar irrigation in the rural areas. So, William, please do come and share your perspective as an entrepreneur. He always impresses me whenever we sit. He says, some of the best ideas. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's always very difficult to talk after everyone has filled up some things inside their stomach. But anyway, it's my pleasure to be here. And as they always say, teaching is actually learning twice. So basically, as I'm talking to you, I will also be learning when we are interacting. I will get a lot of ideas from you. Basically, I would not really recite a lot of things which have been spoken already about. But Zonfu is a social enterprise. It's a company which is focusing on the issues to provide irrigation schemes to small-scale farmers. But what we have actually decided to do was to see, after we got into the Ukama project, there are lots and lots of other offshoot ideas which are coming from that program. One of the most important things was actually to say, what are the pain points of these small-scale farmers? One of the issues was the issue of affordability of those solar products, specifically irrigation in the boreholes. So what we have come up with is a program through a business model called Pay As You Go, where the farmers pay a small deposit in clusters and progressively pay both for access as well as asset ownership. After a certain period, they would own the product. But how did we make it affordable to the farmers? We arranged these farmers in a sort of a crowdfunding kind of an arrangement where they are clustered into 10 farmers. So they collectively pay for one system as a group, and they only get to own the systems as individuals after the 10th person has received his or a system. So that's how they're actually doing. So it's an indirect way of the farmers crowdfunding on behalf of each other. But we have also discovered that it's also important for these farmers to have a market linkage. So we have also developed a platform. Actually, it's an app which links the farmer with different markets arrangements like these retail supermarkets and so forth. So what happens is, when the crop is actually planted, the farmer gets to the end user gets to know about the crop, and when the crop has reached maturity, the grading is actually done at the farm site rather than grading at a selling point. Why we did this was basically to avoid a situation where a supermarket would want to grade tomatoes, and then the farmer would only have grade B, but he had already harvested the crop. So what it does is like we provide a 10-key kind of an arrangement where we as a company, we provide solar irrigation as well as extension services, including agronomists who advise the farmers in terms of the kind of expectations the market has on the product. So you'd find out that those products which do not meet the market requirements would not be harvested from the farm. They would remain there for the farmer's consumption. What would only be taken from the farm is what the market is requested through the selling up, which links the market and the farmer. So basically, that's what we have actually found out, to say all the solutions which have been in the market was a matter of people providing a sort of a vitamin rather than a pen stop to the customer. So we have actually come in to provide the solution to the pain points these small-scale farmers have been having. Even at a policy level, you'd find out that most of the solutions which experts and everyone else has been talking about, they are there and the policy is crafted, but there was the missing link about the issue to do with the affordability. So through this Ukama project, it has actually led us to a lot of other offshoot programs. Like right now, we are piloting a product for a village, a garden for a village in Zimbabwe. We have worked out that there are about 35,000 villages in Zimbabwe, and we are targeting to have a garden at each and every village, just for nutrition purposes. But when you look at the commercial value in terms of market, 35 times an average price of about 5,500 US per system, it translates to about 192, if I'm not wrong, 192 million, which means it's a market which you can actually create through the small-scale farmers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, William. As you were talking about that app and your innovative business models for making pumps and irrigation affordable, I wished you were around 15 years ago when I failed spectacularly in farming. So after I finished my undergraduate degree, I went to farm on a 10-hectare plot, producing vegetables and supplying to the market. I thought I had arrived. So the things you mentioned, I experienced them. We would wake up and start harvesting at 4 in the morning to get to the market at 6. And then you'd get there, you get to the back of the shop. There's a guy who, you're throwing your cabbages or tomatoes, and he's saying, there. So then you've got the rejects, but now they are rejected on site. And you have to figure out what to do with them. You can't obviously take them back to the farm. So now you have to go either baki. So then you'd have to go by a street side and start selling by the street side, what has been rejected at the market. A little while later, I got a little bit cleverer, got together some street kids that I cleaned up, and then we started cutting those veggies and packaging them as mixed vegetables and then bringing them back now as mixed vegetables. But it was a challenge, the issue of grading, because you'd only find out when you're at the market. So I really appreciate that innovation. And then I failed spectacularly when I thought it was my breakthrough moment. Came to South Africa, bought a lot of patty pine seed and very expensive seeds. Came back, put them in my tunnels, planted like 5 hectares. And then my 2 pumps failed. I had a mono pump and a submersible pump. They both failed. We are now. So, but I could have been a farmer. So our next panelist is coming from industry. And Phil, if you don't mind also sharing your perspectives, I would really appreciate it.
Thank you ever so much. I have nostalgic senses of my own tooth cutting and USAID programs in the region many years ago when I used to work for Land O'Lakes Development Division. So it's really stimulating to hear everybody's contributions and to see how things have moved on in substance and not just in form, and of course in embracing the sustainability pathway that we need to find. So The point I need to impress upon you, so just out of interest, you might recognize that picture if you were paying attention when Christo was presenting. Those are two of our clients. I work with Christo because we're a majority shareholder in the company that he runs. That is Mr. Nicolas Leroux and Mr. J.J. Love. Now, what do? They produce grapes for a high-end market. And what does that market do? They basically sell wine. But it's not sufficient for these two gentlemen to get the proverbial wad of soil in their hands, like the chairperson spoke about, or where Jamie was talking about access to markets. It's not sufficient for them to preach that story on their own. There's a process called market assurance, and this assurance stems from a number of things that I'm going to talk about just now very briefly. But I think, if we can go to the next slide. Now, that's our Earth, and we're all trying really hard to sustain the Earth. And we are being peppered with a number of different acronyms that many of us might not necessarily have come across. And many of these acronyms stem from one place, really. And I'm not trying to be an alarmist, but the people that develop the balance sheet or the income statement or the format of those things, the people that decided the balance sheet's name must change, is basically IFRS, and IFRS now have an International Sustainability Standards Board, right? So my producers, with their hands in the soil just now, effectively need to demonstrate through third parties that they are sustainable. And I think many of the industries that you're working in, I hope that this is a warning, and I hope that we're a canary in the coal mine, and I hope that we're able to save you money and resources down the road, because what Christo was talking about when he spoke about data and collecting, I would wager that collecting sufficient data now that's compatible with the kinds of standards that might come is really crucial. And I'm going to explain just now how expensive it can be to prove that one is sustainable. So these are some of the audit requirements, and you'll notice Kantu is not helping them bounce, because they effectively bounce on the desk of the retailer. Overseas, they're not bad standards, but they are costly because they're third-party standards. You can't mark your own work. You can't say that you are necessarily a sustainable producer. You have to provide this kind of assurance. Now, the kicker is, if we can get to the next slide, the fruit industry. Our colleagues in the Western Cape did some analysis of what some of the standards are costing their producers. It was an exploratory study, so I need to just emphasize that. It wasn't necessarily empirically sound, so let's just create some margin of error. Let's make it ridiculous, like 30% or 20%. Still, it's a concern. Now, folks who are into continuous improvement might say to us that if you're improving the infrastructure that you have in your business, that you're improving your business, correct? But I think the perception of many producers is that the kind of infrastructure that they are required to implement or change is an imposition by the market. It's not necessarily sincere, sustainability necessarily. So that might be a perception. But I think with the kind of funding that is going towards, and I want to just make one caveat, I don't agree with the study entirely. I don't think it's an annual cost, but in one given cost, when the focus groups in the exploratory design of the research, when they were interviewed, this is what it costs. What is that? Just a slight little caption of data. Some small-scale producers, really small-scale producers, 17% of turnover, not profit, 17% of turnover, was going towards assurance, right? So, but in those cases, it was a full suite of assurance. So, if we can just go to the next slide, please. So now, these are some early, and you're going to see acronyms there that might not be familiar to you. But what our instincts say is then let's work together, right? So let's have one standard, or let's use existing standards, or let's have recognition of one standard by another. And so we've seen a fair degree of that, which is very, very welcoming, because if you're spending a certain amount of time complying to one audit standard to prove that basically you are socially sustainable and that you don't use the wrong chemicals that are on the EU banned list, or that you don't bomb your product with methyl bromide before you pack it or whatever it might be. Some of those questions might be standard, but I think it was presented this morning as well. The assurance industry is an industry. So people are paid to do audits, and people are also paid to go to the market and say, I think my audit is better than the next person's audit. So it in and of itself is an industry. One of the solutions that we have found, and I think just to highlight one of them for time, is Woolworths South Africa getting recognized by Marks and Spencer's in the UK. So what that tells us is that the local South African standard that Woolies puts into place for our small-scale producer, for Mr. Love and Mr. LaRue that I've just shown you just now, for those gentlemen, if they were to supply the wine, which is vinified from the grapes, into Woolworths, they can supply Marks and Spencer's as well, which means that they won't have to do another audit necessarily. But these collaborations don't happen on their own, do they? So associations like us lobby like crazy to try and make sure that this proliferation of audits or proving that you're sustainable, that there's some sensibility to it, that we in fact try and merge some of them, that we recognize each other, but we do it in an environment of trust. So next slide, please, Kanto. I think the big question then is where we're heading, because remember what I said just now, is I'm hoping that some of this might be pre-warning. We might be, a canary. Last night I watched the results of the Oscars, okay? Now what's interesting is the film Everything Everywhere All at Once won 7 out of 11 nominations, right? And I thought this was a fitting omen, because if you take the 17 sustainability development goals, my goodness, they were derived from the political machinations of many of these organizations and countries that are represented there. And then it almost looks as though it's not a very focused affair, is it? But I would imagine that where data around, market and data around sustainability intersect, that might be a good place to start. So in other words, if we're generating data on farm or we're generating data in the processing, like Christo was talking about, then effectively it might be good to start there, because that helps your market out, right? But then there's a place at the table needed to negotiate on what these standards might look like. And there's something which looks like that, which is called the Sustainability Wine Roundtable, which is based in the UK, which interestingly enough is going to come out soon with some data around our own sustainability standards, and that they're actually pretty terrific if you compare them with some of the other countries we compete against. So I think just fair warning around when we try to access sophisticated value chains, we're going to come across this. We've seen it in the wine industry for several years now. It's a process. It doesn't happen on its own, and it can be extremely expensive. So then just to go through the questions. So how do we forge a consensus around the function, the form of data? Well, I think we've got to have a bit of foresight here. So if we're assisting small-scale producers in, let us say, let's just use Mozambique. I was involved many years ago in the fair trade process in Mozambique, trying to get fair trade accreditation there. Are the data that we're developing from the technologies now going to be relevant to the retailers down the road when they require these data of us? And do we prevent costly duplication? I think one's got to really, really call for this, that in as much as we love our colleagues in the audit industry, we really need to be sensible about how we assure things and how we present to the markets that we're not that big of a risk as we seem to be. And how do we ensure the designs take all potential purposes into account? That's basically early. Then what the next generation is talking about, people a little bit younger than me, is greenwashing, right? So, I think we're going to spend a huge amount of time in the future as well, once something is assured and is being presented as something which is green or socially compliant or kind to people that produced it. It can't be passed off as greenwashing. So, interestingly, I was looking on YouTube yesterday, and I'm addicted to my cell phone. Yes, I am, because it's the biggest library in the world. But there was this this picture of people, I believe it might have been in West Africa, storming a cobalt mine, okay? So you had folks who were artisan miners running as fast as they could into the cobalt mine. Now, there are different perspectives to that picture, aren't there? So for the individual looking for the cobalt to sell, that's an interesting economic livelihood that they might access. But for the organization who makes my cell phone, which has got that cobalt in it, for that organization, they want to try and assure me as a discerning consumer that this thing was built in a kind fashion so that people weren't exploited in the process of making it. So that's a very similar example of exactly what I'm talking about. And it's often easy to throw the baby out with the bathwater and cut people off from those artisanal opportunities that they might find. But then, of course, if there is malpractice and malfunction, it can't go untested and unchecked. That's quite obvious. But that's my contribution.
No, thank you very much. I think those are very important lessons. I've been working with a group of farmers in KwaZulu-Natal for the past many years, and we wanted to get them to export their madumbes, taro, which they'd successfully managed to market in Woolworths and Pick and Pay. But the certification aspect that you mentioned and those costs made it pretty much impossible at their scale of production to be able to do it. Even if there was a project that could assist them, it was not going to be sustainable for them to be able to maintain it. So again, we also have to think in terms of how do we innovate around this area so that we make it inclusive and it does not become a barrier for smaller players who don't have big money to be able to get in and also produce and export, into these markets. And I think what you were mentioning around the data, the intersection, if we can get that right, I think that will solve most of the transaction costs or reduce most of the transaction costs and level up the playing field. Now, to our last panelists, we seem to be doing well with time, so everyone will get to enjoy their cocktail. To our last panelists, my very good colleague, Gabriel Lekalakala, from the Department of Water and Sanitation. I think he's got a very colorful... yeah, no. Oh, thanks for that. Oh, Rabbi is online. Okay, so we still have one more panelist online who will come in. That will be after you, Gabriel.
Thank you very much. I'm going to try and respond to Andre's presentation through a little presentation that I put together. We're going to skip some of the slides. I thought I should just put this diagram just as a reminder of how the interlinkages are there and how there are feedbacks and relations between the Nexus approach. So my focus is coming from the water sector. It will be focusing mainly on water. The reason being, well, being biased, slightly biased, is that in regions such as South Africa, where water is a limiting factor, water determines the extent of development, and it's a medium through which we will feel the impacts of climate change, and also it determines to what extent can we achieve adaptation. I'm going to skip this one. Yeah. To Andre's question, where you spoke about behavioral change, we did work following, I worked with Andre, by the way. Following the work that I did with Andre, we, in Limpopo, the reason I put this slide on is to show the importance, I'll show later on, the importance of thinking regionally while acting locally. So in this study, we looked at what triggers people to make decisions. So we interviewed farmers and we used process modeling, looking at psychological distance to determine what influences someone to make a decision. And Andre mentioned markets, which will fit in within the economic constraints. And our findings indicated that there were lots of factors, but the main driving factors in Limpopo, it was people's experience of extreme events. It triggered what kind of options they're likely to adopt. So the study looked at water use. So these areas that are clipped out, they are maize-producing areas in the Limpopo basin part of South Africa. So we looked at climate-smart practices, looking at it site-specific targeted. I know there was a question about fertilizers. So as part of your site-specific targeted, we found that using fertilizers, either microdose or different doses, I'm not an agricultural specialist, but we found that through modeling, that certain areas perform better with little water. And using in situ rainwater harvesting techniques that the ARC have been working on for years, we found that they work better in certain areas where you get up to 75% increase in yields using very little amount of water. I thought I should put this slide. This is an output from what at the time it was termed as the middle of the road GCM, showing heat stress in livestock. I wanted to bring the point of thinking about future water demands and water availability, which is currently my role in the department, to think about that. What are the future demands? What can we do, or what should we be doing, and what policy should be putting in place? So, as you can see from the slide, from the slides I've indicated, we're going to be having an increase in water demands, and this requires mainstreaming climate-smart water management approaches from farm level, where Andre works, through to national policies, legislations across all sectors. Yeah. So when I mentioned earlier that thinking globally, acting locally, the importance of synergies in policies and policy frameworks and regulatory frameworks come into play. We need to ensure that our different policies across the region, where there are shared water basins and rivers, there are links to them. So in South Africa, what we have done, or what, well, I used to work in Parliament, so parliamentarians and bureaucrats have done, is try to link our policies with regional policy. So your international policy, which is your SDGs, your regional policy, which is your Agenda 2063, we try to link them with national policies and also with our financial planning, as indicated on the slide. I won't go into them due to time. So in the department, we are mainstreaming SDGs. So there's a task team set up. So their role is to mainstream SDGs. They work across sectors. Last month, there was a mid-term review conference where they were showcasing some of the achievements, some of the areas that need improvement. And these SDGs, the way they're conceived is that they are interlinkages. So looking at SDG 6 as a water sector, we looked at, when we're addressing them, through mainstreaming them into action and policy within the department, we looked at interlinkages with other SDGs and also how climate change factors in all of them in our planning. I thought I should showcase some of the, before I get there. So in the mainstreaming of these policies within our reaching up to farm level, the water partnerships. Andre mentioned partnerships. The department realized the importance of private-public partnership in reaching some of the goals. So those are some of the success stories. How programs and initiatives are driven through blended funding and commercialization of some of them. The last one, which speaks to your water licensing and your monitoring of water, is the National Groundwater Monitoring Program, which has been implemented through this kind of process. Before I go to the take-home messages, I wanted to share something. Tefazo, you mentioned, sorry I was unable to be here this morning, that the minister mentioned being inclusive and looking at gender representation. As part of my role as the chairperson of the Adaptation Network, we've noted that we need to be intentional in how we address transformation. So through one of the programs funded by Sanbi and Flanders, we, working with civil society organizations, working on adaptation on the ground, we have been intentional in training communities or civil society organizations and helping them on how to access funding to upscale their work. And also bringing in experts like yourselves to provide that science background to them and to their proposals, and also the understanding of how their work fits in within the bigger scheme and creating those kind of linkages. So going back to some of the take-home messages, it's clear from today that WEF Nexus is very important, looking at the stresses of climate change, growing population demands, and with agency, we need to shift towards more resource use efficiency, not only focusing on how much water can be provided, but also how can we change our consumption behaviors, what kind of strategies or technologies or innovations can we use to improve our water use efficiency. And also, this will contribute towards demand management to ensure that our resource is ensured and also is sustainable. As indicated before, there's a need for regional harmonization of policies and efforts towards sustainable use and development. I want to elaborate further on that. Water resources, as you're all aware, are some of the finite resources and most vulnerable. And for their sustainable management and integrated management, South Africa has mainstreamed this into policy and action. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gabriel, for that interesting talk. We'll now move to our panelists who is online, Professor Rabi Mokhtar. Is he available online?
Yes, I am. Good afternoon.
Thank you very much. Yes, we can hear you. Please do go ahead. So we've been talking about the WEF Nexus. Now, this is one of the gurus on the WEF Nexus. So I think he's definitely going to tell us something exciting. Do go ahead, Rabi.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for the kind introduction, and thank you for the organizers to give me this opportunity. I'm in a very tight spot, trying to. Are you hearing me well?
Yes. Yes, we can hear. Yes, we can hear. Yes, we can hear.
I hear a lot of echo. So if you're online, please mute your microphone. Please mute your microphone. There's a lot. Thank you. I'm in a very tight spot, trying to finish a presentation and standing between you and the cocktail. So I'll try to be very quick and very brief. I'll share with you in the spirit of the Nexus session, and in light of also the keynote speaker who focused on the circularity, I'd like to share with you some lessons learned from a case study that we worked on along with FAO in Lebanon, focusing on the Mediterranean diet. Acknowledge my co-authors, Dr. Yenni, Dr. Daher, Dr. Bashur, and Dr. Ko Oshima from FAO. The objective is really of the study is to identify, quantify the interconnections of the water, energy, food system in Lebanon, focusing on nutrition and looking at developing a trade-off analysis platform. When we're talking about the nexus, when we're talking about circularity, the discussion really focused on trade-offs. Lebanon, some of you may know, is going through an unprecedented crisis with the economic compounded with a lot of corruption and a lot of unsustainable practices. On top of that, we see a lot of challenges being in a semi-arid with a water gap and with an energy gap because of the lack of internal resources to really support agricultural production. In the choice of crops, we really looked at the Mediterranean diet, and those are the 33 crops. And those highlighted in yellow have a low self-sufficiency, even though they're foundational in terms of the Mediterranean diet. So that was really a challenge that we had, is to how do we produce locally and to what extent we can produce locally to ease the pressure on many of the Lebanese population who are importing some of these food commodities. This is a chart representing the protein content versus irrigation requirement. So if you can see my cursor, we really want to be in this zone with a high protein, low water content or low water irrigation system. So this would be the almond, the beans, the lentils, and the walnut. Those are the foundation to the Lebanese diet, and they use low irrigation, have a low irrigation requirement. I'm not going to go through extensively through the methodology, but we do have scenarios that we built. We have the engine that we've been working on with the Water and Energy Food Nexus 2.0. And of course, we have a lot of output in terms of footprint for water, land, energy cost, emission, and nutrition. And at the end, there are a lot of trade-off analysis that I will be discussing. So we have a base scenario that looks into different self-sufficiency rates, different water resources portfolio, and different energy portfolio. Last but not least, which may be very unique in countries that are facing some economic crisis, is the energy currency conversion. You go to the bank and every day, or even multiple times a day, the value of the currency exchange between the Lebanese lira and the US dollar changes. So we needed to take this into account. We explored various scenarios looking at the increased self-sufficiency, local production versus import. We looked into conventional versus treated wastewater and fossil fuel versus renewable. Of course, when you deal with renewable and when you deal with treated wastewater, there are additional costs that the production would have to incur. And we looked into the outcome, and the trade-off analysis include irrigation water cost, the energy requirement, emissions and land requirement and cost, and the nutritional value. So some of the results with a nutrition centric is, if you want to improve 100%, increase the beans and dry beans and broad beans and lentils and chickpea and beans and all of those self-sufficiency to 100%, certainly that would increase your water requirement, would increase your energy and land requirement, and of course would increase your emission, but also it has a huge impact on nutrition, and it reduces our reliance on that the imported food. Again, if we also wanted to have shifting from export to greater local production, and where you rely a little bit more on the local production and decrease production of crops that has higher the self-sufficiency, this would certainly increase our reliance, but it does improve our nutrition, but improve actually our cost. This is that scenario compromises on the role of agriculture in terms of the GDP, but again, this may not be a desirable scenario when it comes to income to farmers. So This scenario is actually an overwhelming scenario where we look at the shifting, the same scenario shifting from export to greater local production, but with a fluctuation in the currency scenario. And you could see here the overwhelming output. It was 100% more increase in cost due to the conversion of the Lebanese lira. Just to give you a context, this was 2 years ago, and today this figure is way out of range, because the U.S. currency today, the one US dollar conversion is a $90,000 Lebanese lira conversion. So even this today, this scenario would even be more extreme. Other scenarios, when we look at adding renewable energy, treated wastewater, and with the currency fluctuations, we're able actually to increase all of our metric would be increased, except that the cost would be high because of the energy, because of the currency conversion. However, we would reduce significantly our emission because reliance on renewable energy. Again, with the currency fluctuations, this would also be significant, and I'm going to skip that into looking into some of the outcome and policy implication. Yes, we can in Lebanon increase our production and increase our domestic production and looking into higher nutritional value. However, there is a cost associated with it in terms of our water, energy, land, and carbon footprint that need to be accounted for. And if you look at the currency conversion, that even exacerbates the problem with the financial situation. So with the reallocation of existing resources, expanding the existing resources with renewable energy and with water and wastewater reuse, we can create an environment that will improve our domestic production. This, however, need a cross-sectoral dialogue, this is why the Nexus is important. We need to engage multi-stakeholders, and we need to engage with the policymaker in terms of adapting and looking at some new policies to incentivize this. We are at the moment trying to adapt and replicate this in other countries in the region. Sorry, I had to go quickly because I did not want to stand between you and the cocktail. I hope this was useful. We'll be happy to take any questions if there are any.
Thank you very much, Rabbi, for that.
I can't hear you.
Oh, I think they've muted me. Let me. Okay, they muted me. Yes. So thank you very much for that presentation. We've come to the end of the presentations and our panelists' responses. I know people are eager to go, but I'm going to allow for 3 big questions. Our panelists are here for the cocktail, I believe. Is anyone leaving before the cocktail? No. Yeah, they all look like they're into the party. So our speakers are going to be here for the cocktail, so you can still engage with them during the cocktail. But just for this session, we'll take 3 burning questions. There's one hand there. There's another one at the back, and there's a third one here.
Yeah, and I want to link it to the 2023 year of millet and the Russia-Ukraine crisis. What are your plans for partnerships at continental level to leverage on the two themes of the year. Thank you.
Okay. We'll take the second question from there, and then we'll come back to the last question.
Thank you for the good presentation. This is Norman from the ARC here in South Africa. To the last presenter, he has shown that the intervention or the analysis that he has done is pointing to local production. I'm very much interested in what will be the impact on social issues such as job creation and so on, because I think the message will probably come out loud and clear if the impact on the social side is demonstrated from this analysis.
Okay, thank you. And then the last question is right here. And then we'll give our panelists an opportunity to respond.
Hello everyone, my name is Kat Curie, I'm from Cameroon. My question goes to Dr. Gabriel. So you mentioned site-specific, measures that are used to be able to increase yields. I wanted to ask, is it still in the research phase? And if not, has it succeeded? How can you scale this up? And what are the strategies that you have used to be able to scale this up? And then the second question, what challenges have you encountered and how did you manage to solve them? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So this is what we'll do. I'll give you an opportunity to answer, and in answering, please also provide your parting shot. So we'll start with Andre, then we'll come to Rabi online, then we'll come to Gabriel, then we'll come to Inga. The second part of her question had touched a bit on the issues of scaling. So maybe you can just comment on what we are doing in terms of scaling and also give your parting remarks. And then to the other two panelists, also just give you a shot to then give your concluding remarks. Okay.
Thank you. With regards to regional partnerships within the region, in the last 10 years that we've been working as a pretty large multinational team, we've worked in several countries. The idea is to continue working cross borders, cross scale, working with a range of partners. Unfortunately, we don't have money to work with everybody, but we are also working very hard on soliciting further funding to be able to increase the networks of the people that we work with. But albeit cocktails, we can talk about that further. Just a very quick comment on our Professor Muta. Thank you very much. That was a really, really interesting presentation, and there's a lot of food for thought. And please expect an email from me. I would love to hear how we can collaborate on your level of thinking with ours. So appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andre. We'll come to Rabi now to respond.
Thank you all. Would be delighted, Andre, to follow up on this study and maybe expand it to the African continent. The question that came is a very important question, and the answer is not an easy one. Yes, there is a job creation by increasing the domestic crop production. However, the dilemma that we went through in doing that is, what do you optimize? Do you optimize with self-sufficiency and reduce the food production and food costs at the consumer level, or you improve and increase the export of food so that it can increase the income from the farm sector and increase the productivity of agriculture in general to the GDP. These are not necessarily the same questions. They both support the farmers, but the bigger question is, what do you optimize the GDP contribution of agriculture to GDP, or you work on lowering the domestic or lowering the food costs by increasing the domestic. Both of these are social factors. They have trade-offs, and they both have social implications. And I think the discussions are still ongoing with the local policymakers to increase food production, whether for export or whether for self-sufficiency. But those are two big questions that we were battling with. And I would be delighted to further engage with you with some questions as we move forward, even after the session is done. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Rabbi. Gabriel?
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. The work we're doing, it was initially mostly research, looking at small-scale farmers. But commercial farmers have operationalized this in South Africa, where they use GIS and other technologies to manage application of your fertilizers and your water in their fields. And the ARC, Sue sitting at the back, she actually provides training to practitioners on this. So it is being operationalized. I guess one of the challenges we faced, I think one of the panelists said it, when we were doing the trials in the villages, I was accused of being a witch because farmers were experiencing a doubling and in some area tripling in yields. And you find that the neighboring farmers, in one of the dry seasons, they lost all their crop. But initially, the main challenge was uptake by communities. That's why having to study what triggers which community to take certain decisions was very helpful. Also, in selecting which approaches they're likely to use up till now. I can happily say that till today, since I left the Ministry of Agriculture, I still get calls from the community members asking me when I'm coming back. As a parting shot, I would like to say it is important that we ourselves as practitioners, as the researchers in the room, start thinking about how do we improve our water use efficiency and contributing towards the transformational adaptation. Should we be rethinking the kind of crops that we're planting now, or technology to improve the crops that we're planting now, so that we don't find ourselves having crop failure in the years where water supply assurance is not sufficient. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Inga?
Thank you. Really interesting and very diverse perspectives. Maybe to try to just bring two thoughts together. I was listening to the presentation that you made on industry standards, and just today, in fact, I was attending a boot camp, a regional boot camp for agribusinesses, like Williams Zonful. And we were talking about what are these major constraints in the enabling environment. Industry standards sort of, is one of those top issues coming up. And in fact, it even went so far as, we spoke about some of the early accelerators that were developed 10, 15 years ago. Many of those companies can't find them anywhere. Where are they, And it's because of these kind of issues that they sort of fail after that 5-year, suicide, what do they call it? The value of death, exactly. So really interesting points there. But what acceleration programs are trying to do is not only just provide sort of scaling grants to agribusinesses, but it's also helping them navigate this. So we provide technical assistance to help them navigate industry standards, tax exemption, partnership mapping, and that brings me to the next point, just around the need for innovative partnerships. This seems to come up a lot now, and so what is a partnership, an innovative partnership in this day and age? I think we always talk about the need for partnerships, but sort of understanding what is needed in our current agri-food system for partnerships to succeed, and to measure the impact of partnerships is really important. But yeah, I mean, I think it's about learning alliances. This is what we're trying to do. Bringing both, our NAS networks, Cardessa, Asarica, I know they're in the room, but also these non-traditional partners, television shows, other types of partners to be able, but yeah, I think the gap is still trying to measure impact of these non-traditional partnerships. So if anyone's interested, I'm really keen to chat more about that.
Thank you very much, Inga. Can pass it on to William.
Okay, thank you very much. I think from the discussions, I think it has come clear that as entrepreneurs, it's very important for us to come up with innovative business models. And also in terms of technology, you need to know you need to choose the right horse to ride, because some of the technology might not be appropriate with the small scale farmers, because it's not something which just is just imposed to the farmers rather than getting what the farmers would want. So it's always important for us, as much as we are trying to find solutions, we also encompass the recommendations from the people who are intending to benefit from the technology. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think in certain instances it's quite early to become proactive, not to be seen greenwashing as nascent new industries. And I think one of the important opportunities around preventing that, because we want to care for our environment, we want to be assessed against standards where we can demonstrate that we care for our environment. We want to care for the people that prepare the products that we deliver to the market. But I think there's an opportunity in the early information that gets dispensed, information that gets shared with small-scale producers, that from as early as possible in the process, that a knowledge base is developed on what leadership looks like around human rights and environmental issues. And in that way, I think, to the professor's point earlier, where Africa rise, I think Africa can lead in that regard. If you think of organic production, for example, many producers are organic producers by default. And if that market were to grow, it would be hoped that Africa would take up that position as a leader, as a thought leader, as a progressive, transparent thought leader around that.
Thank you very much. That brings us to the end of this session. I think for me, what has come out of this session is that the agri-food system is complex. We had different speakers from very different and diverse backgrounds, but they were all essentially speaking to the same system, which is the agri-food system, but from different perspectives. We spoke from the secularity perspective, we spoke from the enterprise agribusiness perspective, we spoke from the entrepreneur's perspective, we spoke from an industry and understanding of standards perspective. Gabriel brought in a bit of farmer's perspective. Rabbi then came in to really tie it up in terms of understanding trade-offs and synergies across this space, what gives, what goes, and what does it mean when we are taking decisions and the implications of those decisions. So what that brings about is the sense of the enormity of the tasks, because all of us are all approaching the same issue. All of us are right in our own ways, and all of those truths need to be applied. Now, how do we bring about and merge all those different perspectives and all those different truths and apply it within the same context, because the client is the same. It's the small farmers that we're all trying to develop. So how do we synergize our different perspectives and our different knowledges, not just the scientific knowledge, but also indigenous knowledge and other forms of knowledge that we might not have touched on today. And I think that's a challenge that we, as policymakers, as researchers, as practitioners, as civil society, we need to come out today and ask ourselves that how do we start responding to this challenge? And the other part of it is it's not only complex, it's also a complex system in transition. So it's not just waiting and sitting idle. It is evolving by the day, and it is getting more and more complex. So that's where the transformation comes in, that how do we then come in to transform this? How do we tame this? And those disruptive innovations, the innovative partnerships need to come in. Equitable partnerships that are inclusive and representative need to come in. The technology, the data, the entrepreneurship, everything needs to come in. And over and above it all is the policies to enable and create an enabling environment for all these things to play a catalytic role. So thank you very much, everyone. I'll hand over to the chair, I think. Chilidzi, is it you announcing the cocktail, or there's another person announcing the cocktail? Can we please give a big round of applause to our panelists?
Thank you. Thank you so much for that panel. Thank you, everyone, for the patience. I know the program had said will end at 5:30, but we have now stretched it to 6 o'clock. And whilst we sincerely apologize for taking longer than we had planned, the fact that you're all still in the room shows that this was not a boring session. So thank you very much to the speakers that shared their experiences. We are going to transition now to just a short break for you to stretch, and then we hope you can join us at 6:30 in the main cafeteria area for a cocktail evening. There is going to be just a short program, but the rest of the evening is really yours. For those that want to, just meet new people, network, and for those that perhaps have flown longer than most, that are feeling a bit tired, we will relieve you and free you at 10 past 7. So it's not going to be a long night. It's going to be from 6:30 to about 10 past 7. Maybe let's say 7:15. And then you'll have the evening to yourself. Everyone else, I am sure that the wine will be flowing and the conversation can go on. We will meet again tomorrow morning. We are giving you a bit of a late-ish start. Tomorrow morning we'll start at 8:30 with a summary of today's events, and the first session will begin at 9 o'clock. So have a good evening, and we meet by the cocktail side. Thank you.